Welcome back to DCB's weekly college football recap. It is the day after college football week 2, which means it's time to recap all the chaos that went down this weekend. Most of the games were Saturday this week, a little bit of a change from week 1, but we'll quickly touch on what happened Friday night before we go into the full Saturday slate. First off, Louisville, very unimpressed, have to say. 28-14 to win over James Madison, but really struggled in the trenches, especially early on in that game. Just could not get anything moving on the ground. They had negative yardage on the ground their first 5 or 6 carries. James Madison was clearly intent on stopping it, but Louisville was unable to adjust until later on in the game when they kind of pulled away a little bit. Defense did look solid, but James Madison's got a quarterback dilemma on their hands. Alonzo Barnett did not look very good. He's still clearly recovering from injury. And then Matthew Sluka is definitely more of a pure running quarterback. So James Madison, I was always a little bit down on compared to the market. They're the heavy favorites to win the Sun Belt. I don't think they should be, but Louisville also just not super impressed, unfortunately, coming out of that one. I'm always relatively high on them because I think Jeff Brom is a very underrated coach, but if they don't improve in the trenches, that's going to hold back a lot of what they can do because obviously they have talented players at running back and receiver, but if the quarterback doesn't have time to throw and if they can't establish the line of scrimmage, then that's obviously going to be a problem, especially in ACC play. Couple of other games Friday night. Maryland, it does seem like the offensive improvements were a bit of a mirage. Only put up 20 points in this one against a bad Northern Illinois team. Malik Washington clearly has a ton of potential at quarterback, but missed a lot of throws in this game. I think it will take a little bit of time and development for him to become the player that he can be. No problem, he's a true freshman. But on a positive note, the defense continued to play great, put up a school record 6 interceptions in the first game and held Northern Illinois to 9 in this one. Northwestern, hard to put a ton of stock into their win against Western Illinois, as that is one of the worst teams in all of the FCS, but the offense did take a big step forward. Preston Stone took care of the football, threw 3 touchdown passes. Night and day performance for them after the Tulane game. All right, let's now move over to Saturday, where a lot of people were complaining about this slate, but we actually got a lot of really good games, a lot of games with complete chaotic endings and moments throughout the games. I want to start with the game of the week, though, which is Michigan and Oklahoma. I'll start by giving a lot of credit to Oklahoma. I thought they were incredibly prepared in this game. Their offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle, has clearly transformed this offense already, and he had a great game plan for John Mateer and that receiving core. They used Mateer's legs very effectively in key moments, especially on third down and in the red zone. And despite still struggling to run the ball with their running backs, they were able to have just enough balance to move the ball up and down the field. They were great on third down, even third and longs. Michigan really struggled to get off the field. But on the other side, I unfortunately have to lay a heavy bit of criticism down on the Michigan staff. I thought they were completely unprepared, and it really just looked like amateur hour out there versus Oklahoma's coaching staff. They were completely out-schemed, and from the beginning of the game, they made it very clear that they didn't trust their own players. Bryce Underwood looked solid in the first half when he was given an opportunity to step back and throw the football, but I don't think Michigan called 2 consecutive pass plays at any point in the game until the fourth quarter. And even on 3rd and 7, they were trying to run up the middle. They just clearly did not have a lot of trust in their passing game, and it did not make any sense to me. Michigan did such a poor job of disguising the play calls and switching things up that half the time it seemed like Oklahoma knew exactly what they were doing. Max Bredesen is an excellent blocker for a fullback slash tight end. That's essentially his role, but there were too many times where he would line up wide at receiver, and everybody knew he was just either a lead blocker for a screen or he would motion into the middle of the formation and then point his body in the direction that they were running. So it's really hard to win a game when you're not out scheming anything offensively and they don't have to respect the pass game. Again, Underwood looked sharp, and especially in the first quarter on the few chances that he was given. They just desperately need to open up that playbook. It really felt like they played not to lose rather than to win. Incredibly disappointed from the offensive staff and at times the defensive staff. There were multiple times where Oklahoma was pinned inside the 5 yard line, and you see Michigan corners playing 10 yards off the line of scrimmage, just giving up easy completions to get them out of their own end. Just inexcusable all around from the game plan perspective for Michigan's coaching staff. Some other notable results: Florida loses outright at home to South Florida. USF with two monster wins back to back to start the season over Boise and UF. They now travel to Miami this week in what will be their attempt at a third straight ranked win. I really thought that USF would be outmatched in the trenches in this game, but that clearly was not the case. They ran for 4.4 yards per carry, where Florida only averaged 3.2, and they seemed to execute better in key moments. Florida had to settle for multiple field goals in the first half. They had multiple touchdowns called back because of penalties. Just a lot of disciplinary issues. You got a player spitting on somebody late in the game, just like Jalen Carter did for the Eagles the other night. I'm not sure if that was a copycat move or if this is just a bigger indication of Florida as a program right now. But clearly, Billy Napier right back on the hot seat after Florida really turned it around the second half of 2024. Felt like they had some momentum coming into this season with a ton of talent. And with as difficult of a schedule as they have, this was just a loss that you could not afford to pick up. Going to be a really long road the rest of the way for Florida. They travel to LSU now in week 3. One of my favorite plays this weekend was Duke against Illinois. And watching the game, it really felt like Duke had a decided advantage, especially in the trenches in this one. Illinois nearly made it to halftime without recording a single rushing yard because Duke was dominating the line of scrimmage so much. Unfortunately, they lose the turnover battle 5-0 in this one. Inexplicable penalties, mistakes just throughout the game. Duke under Manny Diaz did not look like a very well coached team. All Illinois realistically had to do was not lose this game. They really didn't do a whole lot to win it. They did pick up a couple of big third downs, but really Duke handed this game to them, and it was very disappointing to see. Still very high on their quarterback, Darian Mensah. He did throw for 334 yards and 2 touchdowns. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough due to the circumstances surrounding that game. Sticking in the Big Ten, an absolutely incredible game Saturday night between Boston College and Michigan State. MSU pulls this one out in double overtime, 42-40 on a walk-off 2-point conversion. Aiden Chiles looks good. I thought he looked good in the first half against Western Michigan, and then the second half, it just seemed like they didn't really trust him to open up the playbook, but this game, he looked very solid once again. He was using his feet very well, ended up with a rushing touchdown in this game and 4 through the air. Did miss a few throws, as you're going to expect. Still a young quarterback, still developing with his passing, but a very solid performance overall. Same thing on the other side for Dylan Lonergan for Boston College, the Alabama transfer. He was not projected to start by most coming into the season. Grayson James was the leader in the clubhouse, but Lonergan won the job, threw for 390 and 4 scores of his own in this one. This was just a surprisingly high-level offensive game between two teams that are expected to finish in the mid-tier of their conference. Normally, I don't comment too much about games involving an FCS team, but this one I do have to shout out because it was incredibly impressive. Florida State might have been a mirage week 1 against Alabama, but I don't think so based off of that second game against East Texas A&M. Florida State wins this one 77-3. They were ripping off explosive gains both in the run game and the pass game. Gus Malzahn has that offense cooking. Another really good game in the ACC in the noon window between North Carolina State and Virginia. This was actually technically a non-conference game. These two schools have not played each other too much recently because of the expansion of all of these conferences. There's 17 teams now in the ACC, so you can't play everyone each year. So Virginia and NC State decided to schedule this in one of their non-conference slots, and we got a really good game out of it. 35-31, North Carolina State wins this one. Zero combined points between the two teams in the fourth quarter. Virginia had the ball back with just over a minute left and put on an absolute masterpiece of a drive before throwing a game-ending interception in the end zone. Pretty much sums up Virginia football over the last decade. They lose this game by 4, had a chance to steal that lead back after leading most of the game. Another good game involving an ACC team was a local battle between Syracuse and UConn. UConn really dominated this game throughout. They led 17-6 and then 17-12 with about 4 minutes to go. Unfortunately, Syracuse then took the lead 20-17. UConn ties it up with a field goal to send it to overtime and then cannot score again. So Syracuse ends up winning this by 7. Very frustrating push with UConn as far as betting perspective goes, but Syracuse, a lot of problems to fix moving forward. I'm taking the game against Tennessee with an even bigger grain of salt now for the Volunteers. Iowa and Iowa State, we pretty much got exactly what we expected out of this one. This rivalry is essentially Army-Navy in that it goes under the total basically every year. 18-3 now to the under in the last 21 matchups between these two teams. You're always going to get a very defensive battle, a close game. Iowa State wins on a late field goal, 16-13. Nobody's surprised. Certainly can't talk about the ACC without mentioning Clemson. Down 16-0 at one point at home to Troy. Ended up shutting them out the rest of the game, scoring 27 consecutive points. But man, Clemson offensively still struggling to run the football. They do seem to believe that Adam Randall is their best running back, even as a former wide receiver. He did get 23 carries in this game. Nobody else had more than 2. So still think this is going to be a long-term issue for Clemson running the football, and it's going to continue to put more and more pressure on Cade Klubnik, who once again did not have a great game here. Arguably, the game of the day was between Baylor and SMU, an old school rivalry between what is now a Big 12 school and an ACC school. This game goes to double overtime as well, where Baylor wins 48-45. They were down big for most of this game, but managed to stick around just enough in order to pull this one out in the end. Baylor went for it on 4th down 6 times in this game, got it 3 times, put up over 600 yards of offense, but this has to be one of the craziest aggressive teams that I've ever seen in college football. They will go for it if it's 4th and 13. They do not care, and they will also throw it deep on any given play. So very boom or bust type of team here with Baylor. There's going to be some games I think that they probably lose that they shouldn't, just because that aggressiveness can come back to bite you, but they also might pull off some crazy upsets because of that. They are going to be in every single game. Another old school rivalry came back this year, which was great. Kansas against Missouri. These two teams absolutely hate each other, as evidenced by the Missouri student who decided to pass up on a chance to kick a 45-yard field goal for 25 grand, but instead kicked the ball towards the Kansas sideline and lift up his shirt, showing a bit of a message for the Jayhawk fans. Pretty comical moment there as Missouri makes a big comeback in this game as well. They were down 21-6 early, had some miscues that Kansas took advantage of, but really they absolutely dominated this game. They had more than double time of possession. They had double the amount of first downs and more than double the amount of total yardage. So a deserved winner in the end. Missouri gets this one 42-31. Don't really have too many bad things to say about Kansas. They did struggle holding up in the trenches, were not really able to run the ball, but I think that says more about Missouri. Their offensive line looked very good, and so did their quarterback, Bo Pribula, in his second start for them. I think he's going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC this year. One of the biggest games of the night slate was between Arizona State and Mississippi State. Number 12 was the ranking for the Sun Devils going into this game. Massively overrated, but Mississippi State also a pretty impressive performance here. I've been talking about their passing game and how much I think it will be improved. Blake Shapen looked really good in this game, and so did his receivers. Brennan Thompson appears to be a breakout type of player for them this year. Even though he's a senior, he's really been able to showcase his top end speed so far this year. They did struggle to run the ball, running it 30 times for just 66 yards. But on the other side, they did not let Sam Levitt get anything going for the passing attack of Arizona State. Only threw for 82 yards and 2 interceptions. So a tale of two different approaches here. Mississippi State really tried to run the ball and couldn't. Arizona State tried to throw the ball and couldn't. And they ended up running it pretty well and making a little bit of a comeback in this game. Mississippi State led at one point 17-0 and then needed a late touchdown to pull this one out outright. But great win for Mississippi State, and kind of a statement here that the SEC once again is just levels above the Big 12. How about some notable G5 results? I told you guys that Texas State and UTSA could possibly be the Group of 5 game of the year. And to this point, I think it is 43-36, the final here for Texas State. A very competitive back and forth game. They did lead most of the way, but both offenses really able to put up quite a few points in this one. A really high level competitive game between two teams that will be right there in terms of who could possibly make it to the playoffs out of the Group of 5. Got to give some credit to Jacksonville State, a 10-point win over Liberty. Big win for them in the Conference USA. Those are probably the top two teams in that league. I really expected Liberty to just roll through this conference this season. Unfortunately, it did not come to pass in this one. The Gamecocks look better than I expected. Really competed with UCF in the first game. Only threw for 52 yards in this one, but that's all they needed. They just steamrolled Liberty on the ground. Cam Cook, the TCU transfer, puts up 195 yards and 2 touchdowns. Big result for them, even though most people don't care about the Conference USA. Quick shout out to Temple. Not going to talk too much about the specific result this weekend, but their offense looks fantastic through 2 weeks. Two really bad opponents, but things we haven't seen out of Temple in a long time. I like their head coach, Casey Keeler. He's won everywhere that he's been. They took him from Sam Houston this summer. I think he is turning that program around. Another big G5 result was North Texas winning in overtime at Western Michigan, 33-30. They were trailing basically the entire game, but Drew Mestemaker and company able to clutch up and win this one down the stretch. Western Michigan, I thought, really struggled in that first game against Michigan State, but clearly they are a little bit better than what they showed in that first game. Still high on North Texas, just got to survive and advance. Absolute disaster result for Oregon State. This was a desperation spot against Fresno here in week 2. They dropped to 0-2 now after a loss to Cal in week 1. The next 2 weeks, they have to travel to Texas Tech and then to Oregon. More than likely an 0-4 start for the Beavers. Shout out to Ohio defending their home territory against West Virginia. I was all over this one. I knew it was going to be a mistake for West Virginia to have scheduled a road game against a MAC opponent, especially one with as dynamic of a quarterback as Ohio has with Parker Navarro. He did make some big mistakes in the second half of this game, ended up with 3 interceptions, but his ability to just extend plays, ran for 87 yards again in this one. He's just such a dynamic dual threat that he gives Ohio a chance to win every time he steps on the field, no matter who they're playing against. I'm leaning much more towards them winning the MAC after backing Buffalo in the preseason. Craziest game of the day. Even though I've mentioned many overtime matchups already, this one has to go to Nevada against Sacramento State. Sacramento State had this game completely wrapped up, but instead of running out the clock, they decided to throw it. Nevada intercepts it and returns it for a touchdown to take the lead with about 30 seconds left. Sacramento State then gets the ball back and has 2 touchdowns taken away by holding penalties. They also missed a tying field goal that would have sent it to overtime. So, incredibly lucky win for Nevada. I would be very cautious with that team heading forward. Probably the most embarrassing G5 result of the week has to be Eastern Michigan. We know this is not a football program, but losing at home to Long Island, that's a big red flag there. Chris Creighton's been there a long time, and I think he's done just about everything he can for Eastern Michigan. Looks like it's going to be a really, really rough year in Ypsilanti. Staying in the MAC, I thought Toledo really made an impressive statement against Western Kentucky. I had liked what I'd seen from the Hilltoppers in the first couple of weeks, but Toledo just crushed them in the trenches in this game, running for over 300 yards and holding Western Kentucky to 2.9 yards per carry. Toledo, I was skeptical about as the MAC favorite this year, but they are clearly good enough to be a contender, and the competitive game against Kentucky looks more impressive after they hung with Ole Miss this week. Probably should have mentioned this one earlier, but Army, an outright winner at Kansas State. Army really struggled in week one, losing outright to FCS Tarleton State. Now they turn around and beat Kansas State, who is just a complete mess right now. They obviously struggled mightily in Dublin in week zero. Then you have to turn around and travel back across to campus in week one to face a very good FCS team in North Dakota. They barely squeaked that one out with a comeback win. And now Army comes to town and beats them outright as a 17-point underdog. Chris Kleiman, I've always been very high on. I thought he was doing a great job with Kansas State coming into this year, but they have clearly taken a big step back on both sides of the ball, and at least from what I've seen, they don't look like a particularly well-coached team. So still some time to turn it around. Only played one Big 12 game, but they're going to have to make a lot of improvements very fast. A couple of notable late-night results. UNLV, an outright winner over UCLA. This was not a surprise to me. I know UNLV looked really bad defensively in week zero, but they've had some time to turn it around and really took control of this game early and often, led it 23-3 at halftime. Nico Iamaleava really did start to dial in and play very well in the second half for UCLA, but it is very clear watching this team that they simply do not have enough talent around him at really any other position. The defense looked very bad. UNLV kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit in the second half, but they were really able to do whatever they wanted early on. Could be the worst team in the Big Ten we're talking about here with UCLA. I actually had high hopes for Stanford going into BYU late last night. Unfortunately, Stanford is just a disaster. I really thought that Frank Reich, being a former NFL head coach, giving him 2 weeks to prepare for this game. Stanford did not play in week one after having a week zero matchup. 2 full weeks to prepare for this one, and they trotted out the same quarterback that can't throw a forward pass, and they couldn't run the ball. 24 carries for 19 yards. It is possible that BYU's defense is just elite. They've now only allowed 3 points in 2 games, but to me, this said a lot more about Stanford than BYU. Last result that I'm going to mention, and then we will move on to previewing some week 3 matchups and looking at some of the early lines. Arizona, got to give a quick shout out to them. I know they were playing Weber State, but they look good so far this season. Noah Fafita with 5 touchdown passes. I feel like a lot of people kind of forgot about him after last year, but he's in his 3rd season now as the starting quarterback for Arizona. Had a lot of question marks about this defense coming into the year. Wasn't really sure what to expect from them on that side of the ball, but they have only allowed 9 points in their first 2 games, so cautiously optimistic about Arizona all around. Now let's look ahead to the week 3 slate. As always, Sunday is when the spreads drop for at least the biggest games of the following Saturday, so we can take a look at them and see if any of these lines are a little bit off. There is one that I invested in immediately when it dropped, and unfortunately it has already moved, so I did not get to post this one. I grabbed Houston -3 against Colorado. You guys have heard me rave about Houston. They looked fantastic yesterday against Rice. Colorado, I still think, is vastly overrated. They're going in there now as 4.5-point underdogs. I would still play this one all the way up to 6, though. I really think Houston defensively can really clamp up, and they have just enough offense this year to make it a very balanced team. That game between Houston and Colorado is on Friday night, and another Friday game is between Kansas State and Arizona, the team that I just talked about. This does feel like a bit of a buy low spot for Kansas State as only a 1.5 point favorite on the road, but that line is very interesting because before the season, it would have been at least a touchdown spread. Another line that I think would have been very different in the offseason is Florida going to LSU. Florida is now a 9.5 point underdog, and I think we're going to get some great line value out of that one. LSU obviously got the big win at Clemson. Doesn't look quite as good now, though, with Clemson struggling so much against Troy. Florida, on the other hand, can't play much worse than they did against South Florida. Nice little buy low spot in what should be a competitive rivalry game. Speaking of Clemson, another big test for them early on in the season. Already had to play LSU in the opener. Now they go to Georgia Tech this week, a game that a lot of people have had circled since the beginning of the summer. It looks like Clemson is about a 6.5 point underdog, and that line has come down considerably, most likely in response to this most recent result. We've got a big-time top 15 matchup between Georgia and Tennessee at 3:30 on Saturday. This one will be at Neyland Stadium. Very difficult environment to play in, one of the toughest in the entire country. Georgia will be laying nearly a touchdown here, but everything I've heard from our resident Georgia insider, it has not looked great so far for Georgia offensively. Going to be tough to lay points on the road there. Pitt and West Virginia will play their yearly backyard brawl rivalry game, one of my favorite rivalries in all of college football. It only recently came back to being a yearly tradition, so I'm very glad that it's here and I hope that it stays long term. West Virginia will be a 4.5 point underdog at home in that one. As I said earlier with USF, they will have another chance to pull off a ranked win as they go down to Miami. That spread is about 16.5 right now, with the Hurricanes favored at home. Texas A&M and Notre Dame should be one of the better games of Week 3 as well. This one will be played at night in South Bend after these two teams matched up at Kyle Field last year. 6.5 point favorite is Notre Dame in this one, but this should be an incredibly physical matchup between two very good offensive lines and two dominant run games. Very excited to see what both of these teams offer up front. I think whoever can throw the ball better will probably win this one. Earlier, we talked about Duke and all of the miscues that they had against Illinois. They will now travel to Tulane as a 2.5 point underdog. This is the team that their quarterback, Darian Mensah, transferred from. I'm sure they will be looking to let him know that he made the wrong choice in transferring out of there. Last game I'll mention that really should not be a competitive game, but I have a sneaking suspicion that it will be. Old Dominion travels to Virginia Tech for an in-state matchup. VT just absolutely collapsed against Vanderbilt after leading the first half 20-10. Get outscored 34-0 the rest of the game. Just disaster decision making by the coaching staff. And Brent Pry is definitely on his last legs there, holding on for dear life to his job. And if they lose to Old Dominion, it could be sooner rather than later that they kick him out of there. All right, that's been a quick preview of the Week 3 board. If you want a more detailed breakdown of the entire slate, we do a Twitter space every week at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. I encourage you to join us there live. It's great. We can interact with the audience. People can leave comments, ask us questions, and obviously we share all of our picks for that weekend of games. So it's a great time. Hopefully I'll see as many of you as possible in there. But until then, enjoy your day, everyone.